The first thing he saw wasn't her. It was the sign nailed into a twisted mesquite trunk with rusted railroad spikes, each letter carved too deep, like someone didn't want the words to fade even after the wood died. "White man knows what you did." The paint was dry, but something darker still leaked from the grain. Not red, not black, a kind of sick brown, like old blood that refused to rot properly. And below it, swaying, something human, not hanging limp like the dead. No, this was worse. The girl Apache, maybe 13, maybe older than she looked, was suspended by the wrists, hoisted behind her back, her elbows twisted the wrong way, shoulders surely dislocated, feet barely grazing the cracked earth like a whisper, a sack of breath and bone, dangling just enough to keep her heart beating and her lungs filling with dust. She was barefoot. Her ankles were raw, like she'd tried to run before they caught her. Her long black hair clung to her face, matted with sweat, or tears, or whatever bled from the soul when the body gave up. And her mouth. It wasn't gagged. It was open, as if frozen mid-scream. Above her head, tied to the same limb, a wind chime rattled in the dry breeze. Not a chime you'd find on a rancher's porch. This one was made of bone, small, uneven bits, some curved like coyote toes, some straight and hollow, strung with twisted copper wire and beads of tarnished silver. It didn't sing. It clicked, like teeth. Click, click, click. A cruel lullaby above a child-shaped curse. The tree offered no shade, just judgment. A mile out, no sound moved, not birds, not bugs, only the wind and the creaking sound of rope shifting across bark. And in the distance, hoofbeats. Samuel Nash didn't believe in omens. But something about the way the sky fractured above this place, white-hot light ripping across a bruise-colored horizon, made him tighten the reins without thinking. His mare, June, tossed her head. He saw the sign, then the girl, then the chime. He didn't draw his rifle and didn't dismount fast and didn't even curse. He just breathed in through his nose, slow and deep, like the wind was trying to whisper something only he was supposed to hear. Samuel wasn't the kind of man towns remembered. Not tall, not loud, not born with the kind of face that left marks. But he had hands that knew the weight of silence. And right now, they curled into fists. He stepped forward. Not toward her yet. Toward the sign. The chime clattered louder, like it didn't want him getting close, but he reached anyway, brushing his fingers across the words, "White man knows what you did." It wasn't a warning. It was a sentence, then a sound, not from her, from the ground. A rattler, fat and coiled, sunbathing just a few feet from her dangling toes. Samuel stopped, raised a boot, and crushed the snake's skull in one decisive stomp, blood and bone popping like ripe fruit. The sound didn't wake her. He approached slowly now, pulling his hat off not out of respect but instinct. Dust clung to his beard. Sweat tracked lines down his neck. He hadn't spoken to another soul in 3 weeks, but he whispered something now. Just beneath breath, goddamn. She wasn't unconscious, not fully. One eye, barely open, tracked him. She didn't flinch, didn't plead, didn't ask, only watched. She didn't care if he cut her down or walked away. That was the worst part. Not the blood, not the dislocations, not even the sign. It was that gaze flat, ancient, and already done with the world. He loosened the rope slowly. Not for her comfort, for her bones. They creaked when her arms dropped forward, wrists folding like sticks snapped the wrong way. He caught her before she fell, her whole body folding into his chest like a paper thing. She weighed nothing, yet she shook fine, invisible tremors, like something inside her was trying to leave and couldn't find a door. He didn't speak, didn't ask who did this, didn't check for anyone nearby. He just stood there, holding her, holding what was left of her, and above them the chime fell still, as if for the first time it was listening. Behind him a vulture circled, not the girl, not him, The tree. The wind carried the sound of a nail loosening in wood. A single bone bead dropped from the chime and struck the girl's shoulder. It left no mark. Samuel looked up, then back at her. Still no sound from her mouth, but her hand. Curled weakly against his chest. Not a grip, not a plea, just a reminder she was still alive, and the tree hadn't finished its story. He turned, took one step, then another, and carried her into the distance out of reach of the sign, out of earshot of the chimes, out of the shadow of the twisted tree that remembered everything men tried to bury. But the dust didn't swallow the scene. It kept it, preserved it, like a scar on the land, and the chime, though broken, began to ring again, softly, like it was trying to say his name. June's hooves left no prints in the cracked clay as Samuel rode westward with the girl in his arms. The sky had cooled just enough to bleed lavender at the edges, but the land still felt like iron under a blacksmith's hammer, hot and unforgiving. The girl didn't stir. Her head rested against his chest, lashes twitching now and then like she was dreaming. Or fleeing. Samuel didn't speak. Words felt wrong out here. They might shatter what was left of her if spoken too loud. He rode in silence, the kind that sinks deep into a man's bones and makes them ache. His ranch sat in the hollow between two bluffs, a place the map forgot. It wasn't big. One cabin, one stable, a well that groaned in protest every time he pulled the rope, 3 cows, 1 pig, and June, the mare more loyal than smart, more tired than young. Samuel didn't lead June to the stable. He rode her straight to the cabin door, dismounted slow, and for the first time in a long time, he opened the door not for himself, but for someone else. The cabin breathed dust. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, burnt coffee, and long quiet memories. He laid her on his cot and hesitated. What do you do with someone this broken? He didn't know, but he knew what not to do. He didn't undress her, didn't wash her wounds yet, didn't pry the rope burns from her wrists like he had the right. Instead, he knelt beside the bed and just watched her breathe. It was barely there. She wasn't sure if she wanted to keep doing it. There was a bucket near the hearth, half full with rainwater from the night before. He took a rag, soaked it, and wrung it out with hands used to breaking fence posts. Then, slow as the tide coming in, he touched the cloth to her forehead. She flinched, not from pain, from memory, but she didn't open her eyes. He worked with silence, dabbed her temples, wiped the dust from her cheeks, cleaned the blood from her mouth, careful never to press too hard. She had bruises down her neck, a welt on her collarbone, a cut above her ribs, half covered by a ripped scrap of shirt. Each mark told a story, and he didn't ask to hear them. He just listened with his hands. On the porch, the wind stirred, the old weather chime, a real one this time, made of driftwood and rusted spoons, clinked in a lazy rhythm. But inside, all was still. She shifted once, barely. Her lips parted like she might speak, but nothing came out. Samuel dipped the cloth again. She opened her eyes, just for a second, then closed them. But she'd seen him, and he'd seen her. Not her body, not her wounds, her. He stepped outside, sat on the edge of the porch with his elbows on his knees and watched the sun bleed out across the dirt. June whinnied softly from the side of the house, like she knew something had changed. He didn't pet her, didn't smoke, didn't pray, just stared. A single copper bead rolled out from beneath the folds of her shirt. It fell to the cabin floor with a sound no louder than a breath, but Samuel heard it. He turned, picked it up, held it in his palm. It was twisted and blackened, but the shape was familiar, from the chime, the bone chime. He turned it over. It was warm. He walked to the far wall of the cabin where he kept an old box, nailed shut, stained with years of rain and rust. He opened it with the claw of his hammer reluctantly. Inside tools, rope, a tin of kerosene, and an old revolver he hadn't fired in years. He didn't touch the gun, and he placed the copper bead inside the box and closed the lid, back in the room. She'd shifted. Her hand now rested on her chest, just over her heart, not clenched, not fisted, just resting there. Samuel sat down in the old chair beside her. It creaked like a guilty conscience. He stayed there through the night, didn't sleep, didn't move. The girl slept shallow, but she didn't moan, didn't thrash, just breathed. Alive. Morning came in gold. Light spilled through the cracks in the shutters, tracing bars across the floor. When Samuel rose to fetch water, the chair barked under his weight. She stirred again. Eyes opened. This time she didn't close them. He turned, met her gaze. She looked at him like someone seeing a stranger and trying to decide if they could survive him. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just nodded once, like a promise. And on the porch, the wind chime. The normal one fell silent, as if it, too, was waiting to see what came next. That night, he boiled water in a kettle and searched for clean cloth. He found an old dress shirt too fine for ranch work, left over from a time before silence filled the space where family should have been. He tore it into strips, set them in the basins, and waited, not for permission, for trust. For, when he entered again, she didn't flinch this time, didn't speak. But her eyes followed the bowl, and her hand moved slightly, as if saying, "I'm still here." The wind moved outside, not fierce, not angry, just soft, steady. A whisper against the walls, like something watching, something waiting, and above the hearth, that copper bead. The one in the box seemed to hum, not loud, just enough for him to hear her pain, still echoing, but quieter now. Because he stayed, because he didn't look away. The girl hadn't spoken, not a word, not a whisper, not even a grunt of pain. But in the 2 days since Samuel had carried her out of the mesquite tree's shadow, she had begun to breathe like she meant it. That, he figured, was something. Samuel didn't know her name, didn't ask. Names came with stories, and stories had a way of splintering people open before they were ready. So instead, he gave her silence, and warm water, and time. He kept the cabin quiet. No hammering, no firewood chopping, no singing to the cows like he sometimes did to keep the ghosts away. Just the soft thump of boots across old pine floors, the steady rhythm of water poured into tin basins, the creak of the chair beside her bed every time he sat to clean her wounds. She never turned away. The rope burns across her wrists had blackened. Her shoulders, twisted from the hanging, had slowly begun to settle back into place with gentle massages and salves made from crushed sage and bear grease. He'd learned that trick from an old Lakota woman decades ago. Funny how things you didn't think you'd ever need came crawling back from memory when it mattered. She watched him now, not in fear but in calculation, eyes half-lidded, following the movement of his hands like she was measuring something invisible. Her jaw clenched when he dabbed at the wound beneath her ribs. He paused. "Too much?" he asked softly. She didn't answer, but her eyes blinked. Once. He took that as a no. By the third evening, he had placed her outside on the porch blanket over her legs, kettle by her feet. The air had cooled just enough to let a person breathe without burning. She sat still, but her eyes, they moved, scanning the tree line, measuring the distance between her and the world. Samuel sat 2 steps down, sharpening his knife with long, lazy strokes, not because he needed to, because the sound was calming, reassuring. He didn't speak, didn't need to. And then, without turning her head, she lifted her hand, pointed, to the corner of the porch, a bone. The same one that had fallen from the wind chime that day. He'd left it there, maybe on purpose, maybe out of superstition. Now, it caught the last edge of sunlight, glowing faint gold. He stood, picked it up and held it out to her. She stared at it a long time, then reached. Her fingers brushed his palm. Just briefly before curling around the bone, She turned it over, studying the copper wire still twisted through its hollow. Then she did something he didn't expect. She smiled. It wasn't big. It wasn't safe, but it was real. That night, after he tucked her back into the cot, she reached for the tin plate beside the bed and dragged a broken twig through the soft layer of ash at the bottom. Samuel watched from the doorway. At first, it looked like nothing, just lines, curves, half shapes. Then he saw it. Wings, drawn wide and wide and wide, stretching off the edge of the plate, not flapping, soaring, and beneath it, a stick figure, small, kneeling, arms raised toward the sky. He stepped closer. The wings weren't angel wings. They weren't eagle wings. They were jagged, uneven. One feather cracked, one missing entirely. It was a bird that had survived something, not flown above it through it. She looked up at him. He met her gaze when the chime outside let out a single click, then nothing. That night, Samuel added 2 logs to the fire instead of 1. Not for warmth, for light. She deserved to sleep without darkness. In the morning, the girl walked just a few feet. From the bed to the doorframe where she stood barefoot and watched the sun creep over the hills, Samuel was already outside feeding June. He turned when he heard the floorboards groan. Didn't say anything, just gave her a small nod. She didn't return it. But she didn't go back inside either. She stayed. By midday, she was sitting beside the trough, watching the pigs root in the mud. Samuel handed her a half-carved piece of wood meant to be a spoon. Though he'd never been good at finishing things, she took it. Not like a gift, like a challenge. Later, she carved a groove into the handle. A spiral, then another. Samuel recognized it, Apache for journey. She handed it back. He didn't say a word, just dropped it into his pocket, close to his heart. That evening, he cooked rabbit stew. Thick, with too much salt and not enough meat, but warm. He placed the bowl in front of her. She looked down, then back up, then slowly lifted the spoon. She ate 3 bites, then 4. She paused, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, set the spoon down, and finally looked at him fully. Her voice was barely air when it came. "You didn't leave." Samuel froze, then quietly, "No." She nodded once, then picked up the spoon again. Not to eat, to carve. She didn't say another word that night, but in the corner, the broken bone chime caught the firelight and didn't look so cruel anymore. Sometimes, the deepest kindness is silence. Sometimes healing starts with nothing more than warm water and quiet hands. The next morning, she asked for charcoal. Not in words. She stood beside the hearth, held out her hand, and pointed at the cold ash beneath the fire grate. Samuel stared a moment, then nodded. He fetched a scorched pine knot from behind the cabin and handed it to her. She took it delicately, like something sacred, and then, without a word, she walked to the wall. Samuel didn't interrupt. He just watched. She started at eye level, dragging the black wood across the wood plank wall in broad, uneven strokes. No hesitations, no sketches. Just motion-driven, raw, deliberate. He didn't recognize it at first. Just a flurry of lines and curves and harsh edges. But then, a wing, long, curved, cracked in the middle. Then another, jagged, spread. Then a body narrow, fierce, unchained. A hawk, mid-flight. But the eyes were hollow circles, empty. She stopped and stared at it for a long time, hands still smudged with ash. Then, in a motion so small it might have been a tremble, she drew a thin black X over the heart. Samuel didn't ask what it meant. Didn't need to. Some birds flew because they were born to. Others flew because something was chasing them. This one was flying from a grave. Later, she added more markings beneath the hawk symbol Samuel didn't fully recognize. An arrow broken in 2, a child's hand, a house, upside down. When he finally asked, not pressing, just gentle, she gave him a look that wasn't cold or scared, just old. Not story, she said. Truth. Then she picked up a knife and began carving the hawk into the wall. No longer charcoal. Wood. Permanent. By week's end, the wall had become her memory. That it wasn't pretty. It wasn't clean. It was hers. One night he found her by the fire, humming. A tune with no words, low, circular, hypnotic. She held something in her hands, a feather, yellowed, bent. He sat beside her and didn't speak. She placed the feather beside the broken bone she had kept. Then she looked at him. The bird, she whispered. It used to sing. Samuel nodded, not fully understanding. She added, till they tore out its voice. Then she went quiet. After that, she stopped drawing, stopped carving. But every day she sat beside the hawk on the wall, tracing the cracked wings with her finger, not fixing, just remembering. One morning, she asked for a paintbrush. Samuel didn't have one, so she made one from her own hair, tied to a stick with string pulled from her blanket. She crushed wildflowers in a bowl, added water, ground them with a stone, made her own yellow, and with it, she painted fire into the hawk's wings. Not red, not orange, but gold, as if the bird had stolen sunlight and kept it in its feathers. Samuel watched from the porch, arms crossed. She hadn't asked permission. She didn't need to. This was her wall now. That night, she spoke again. Her voice came like flint against steel, rough, sudden, striking light. His name was Clay. Samuel turned, waited. He said I wasn't real, that I was a thing, a price. Her hands clenched, unclenched. He bought me from men who took me. Called me a whisper, said I was lucky to be alive. She looked at the floor. They tied me up when I stopped smiling. Samuel didn't move, didn't reach, just listened. They made the sign, to scare people. Said white men fear being known. She paused, and then they left me. To remind the land. Silence. Then, from outside, the bone chime rattled in the breeze, a soft clatter. No menace this time, just sound, alive. Samuel finally spoke. You're not a sign. She looked up. You're the wind. She didn't cry, but her chin shook, just once, then stilled. In the morning, she braided her hair, not neatly, but tightly, like armor. And when she passed him by the trough, she whispered, I'm ready. For what he asked, she didn't answer. She walked inside and painted a second hawk beside the first, this one smaller but flying upward, out of the frame. At sunset, Samuel found her holding the copper bead from the old bone chime. She had woven it into a leather strand, then tied it around her ankle, a symbol no one would see, but one that went with her. From that day on, she moved differently, not fast, not fearless, but forward. And every evening, she lit a small fire just beneath the hawk's painted wings, to remind it could still be warm. Sometimes the things carved deepest into us aren't seen by others, but they hum in our skin, sing in our silence, and rise eventually like birds with broken wings learning how to fly again. The hawk's wings turned golden just as the girl's eyes did, not in color and clarity. She stopped flinching at every loud sound, stopped pausing at the cabin door like freedom might run away if she moved too fast. And Samuel, he stopped counting the days, because every day she stayed felt less like a guest and more like breath. They never spoke of what happened under the mesquite tree again, but it echoed in how she planted wildflowers along the porch steps, in how he carved 2 spoons instead of 1, even though he still ate with his hands, in how she brushed June with quiet reverence, humming that same low circular tune, half memory, half magic. The wind carried the scent of cedar and rain one morning. She stepped onto the porch barefoot, her hair wet from the well, and held something up to him, a copper feather, woven from wire, beads, and frayed thread, delicate, as if it had aged before it was born. She handed it to him. Didn't speak, didn't smile, just offered it. And walked away. Samuel stood there for a long time, the feather resting in his palm like a truth. Then he slid it beneath the leather band of his hat, and wore it every day after that. They built new routines. He taught her how to split kindling without splintering her thumbs. She showed him how to press ochre into leather so it wouldn't crack. They traded tasks in silence, but silence wasn't emptiness anymore. It was language. One evening she tried baking cornbread. It burned. The edges turned black, the center soggy. She sat on the step, holding the pan like a small failure. Samuel took a bite, chewed with exaggerated thoughtfulness, then nodded solemnly. Best damn charcoal I've had all year. She laughed, a small, sudden sound, then covered her mouth, startled by the shape of joy in her throat. He didn't laugh with her. He just looked and smiled. That night, she sat by the fire, drawing in ash again. But this time, no hawks, no broken arrows, just two hands, not clasped, not clinging. Open, facing each other. She didn't show him, but she didn't hide it either. The next morning, Samuel found a scrap of cloth folded on his pillow, wrapped inside a single turkey feather, dyed yellow, tied with copper thread. He tucked it into his boot, didn't say a word. There was no kiss, no confessions, no late-night whispers of love beneath starlight. But one day she touched the back of his hand while they sat by the fire. Not by accident. Her thumb stayed there, and his breath caught just briefly. They didn't speak of it. They didn't need to. It was written in the way she swept the floor before he came inside, in the way he shaved before breakfast even though no one cared how he looked, in the way her paintings began to include the cabin, and his tools began to include copper. One night, she caught him staring at the hawk on the wall. He turned away quickly, embarrassed. She rose, stepped beside him, and laid her hand on the painted wing, then slowly pressed her other hand to his chest, right over his heart. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she didn't move them. Samuel placed his hand over hers. Not hard, not possessive, just enough to say, "I feel it too." She didn't pull away. Later that week, she asked him quietly what his mother's name was. He told her. Then she told him hers, Suni. He said it aloud. It sounded like wind through feathers, like soft rain before sleep. She smiled, then repeated his, Samuel, as if tasting it. Sometimes love doesn't explode. Sometimes it drips into the cracks until the broken parts don't rattle anymore. One evening, while tending the stable, Suni braided 3 strands of copper wire together and hung them from the rafter above June's stall. A new chime. No bones. Just metal and light. When the wind touched it, it didn't click. It sang, high, pure, barely there, but beautiful. Samuel watched her hang it, arms above her head, feet tiptoed on a stool, and he thought she belongs here. Not because he saved her, not because she stayed, but because this land had room for something that wasn't rage anymore. Later, she caught him looking, didn't tease or didn't speak, just tilted her head. He said, "I thought I was done." She asked, "Done what feeling?" She stepped closer, pressed her forehead against his chest, didn't say anything, didn't move, just listened. To the sound of a heart, one that had gone quiet for years, starting to remember how to beat. Some loves don't ask permission. They just arrive and refuse to leave. And outside, in the quiet hush of dusk, the copper chime sang again. No longer mourning, just being. The trouble didn't come loud. It came on a clear sky, in the shape of a man riding a black horse with polished boots and paper in his pocket. His name was Harlan Clay. A smile too white, a face too clean, and hands that had never dug a grave only pointed where to dig. Samuel saw him first through the glass pane. He didn't move, just watched the dust trail curve toward the cabin like smoke before a fire. Suni was painting on the back wall something new. Not a hawk this time. A sun. A bright, burning circle made with crushed yellow root and ochre. The hoofbeats stopped at the porch. Samuel stepped out, slow. Didn't take his hand off the doorframe. Clay didn't dismount. Didn't offer his name. Just tipped his hat and held up a folded piece of paper. She belongs to me. Samuel didn't reach for it. Didn't read it. He looked past the paper, straight into the man's eyes. You'd best choose different words. Clay laughed, soft. I paid good coin. Got the signatures, sold fair and square. She ain't yours. She's not anyone's. Well now, that's where we disagree. Behind Samuel, Suni had come to the door. She didn't speak, but Clay saw her and smiled. That smile, it was the kind of smile men wear before doing something terrible. I could take you to court, Clay said. Hell, I could take you to the dirt. Got men in town. Lawman owes me 2 favors. All I need's the girl. Samuel didn't flinch. Then get off your horse. Clay raised a brow. Say again you want to take her. Do it like a man, not with paper. The tension split like dry bark. Even the air seemed to pause. Clay stepped down. Boots too clean. Hands too confident. Samuel didn't wait. He stepped down too, not fast, but with finality. The kind of movement that ends things. They circled each other in the dust. No audience, on just wind and memory. Clay struck first, fast, arrogant. Samuel dodged, barely. His fist landed once right under Clay's ribs. Clay staggered, spat. You'd kill for her. Samuel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The copper feather on his hatband gleamed in the sun. Clay drew his revolver. Too quick. But Samuel had seen death before. He didn't hesitate. He closed the distance and slammed Clay's wrist against the porch post. The gun dropped. Suni stepped forward. Not screaming, not weeping. She held something in her hands. A lasso. The same one Clay had used when he first took her. She threw it to Samuel. He caught it. Clay tried to run him, but Samuel moved faster. In one smooth motion, he looped the rope around the man's shoulders and yanked hard. Clay hit the dirt like a stone. Samuel tied him to the post, tight, then stepped back. You done? He asked. Clay cursed, struggled. Samuel picked up the revolver and tossed it into the trough. Suni stepped beside him. She knelt, held up the paper, read it quietly, then tore it in half, then until all that remained was pulp. She stood, held Clay's gaze, and then said softly, Now you know what it feels like. They didn't kill him. They didn't need to. Samuel loaded him back onto his horse and sent him riding east, bruised, defeated, small. The wind picked up behind him, not strong but steady, like it was pushing him away. When the dust settled, Suni stood beside the porch post holding the sign. Not the new one. The old one. The one from the mesquite tree. White man knows what you did. She looked at Samuel, then struck a match, set it alight. The flames caught quick, hungry. She didn't watch it burn, and she just turned away. Later, she scooped the ashes into a small tin, placed it beside the bone chime. Not as a reminder, as a burial. That night, they sat in silence. The sun dipped low. The fire burned slow. Samuel poured 2 cups of coffee. Suni didn't drink hers. She just held it, warmth seeping into her fingers. Then she whispered, I'm not afraid anymore. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Love isn't proven in words. It's proven in what you're willing to fight for, even when no one sees. And outside, the copper chime swayed gently, its song no longer lonely, just alive. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the sky had already begun its slow confession, a blush of lavender against the rim of black hills, soft as a secret whispered to morning. Samuel stepped out first, his axe over one shoulder, mug in hand, steam curling upward in the breathless dawn. The air was cool, the kind of cool that makes a man forget he's old. Suni was already outside, kneeling, barefoot in the dirt, brushing against gravel, her hands covered in yellow pigment. She didn't look at him, just kept painting. The wall of the cabin, the same wall where once she had drawn the broken hawk, was now nearly filled. But this was different. There was no violence in this bird. No fire licking its wings, no cracked feathers, no desperate sky. It was still a hawk, but this one slept, wings folded gently around itself, head tucked, peaceful. And above it, in bold, uneven strokes, she had written, "She lives here now." Samuel didn't speak, didn't sip. He just stared. She stood, not slow, no longer fragile, just calm. She wiped her hands on a rag and walked to the edge of the porch, where the old chime hung, no longer bone, no longer fear. It was something else now. Strips of polished wood, copper beads strung between tiny yellow feathers, bits of glass that caught the light and scattered it like confetti. She touched it once. It chimed, but not sharp. It rang like laughter echoing from memory. Then she did something Samuel never expected. She turned to him and opened her arms. He didn't move for a second, didn't trust what was happening. Then he stepped forward and wrapped her in his arms, tight, like something that had always been missing had finally come home. For a long time, neither of them said anything. They just stood in the morning, wrapped in warmth, the hawk resting behind them and the wind carrying only peace. Later, Samuel began splitting wood again, but his motions were slower. Not from age, from awe. He kept looking back at the wall, at the hawk, at the words. She lives here now. Inside the cabin, the tin of ashes still sat in its place untouched. Suni didn't throw it away. She planted wildflowers around it. As if to say, this pain grew me. She began sleeping without her knife nearby. She started leaving the door open at night. And when the wind blew, she let it in. One evening they sat on the porch watching the hills glow red. Suni leaned her head against Samuel's shoulder. Then she whispered, "They never named me right." He looked down, waited. She said, "Suni means the last echo. My mother gave it to me before they took her." Samuel's jaw tightened. She looked up at him. But now, it means something else. He didn't ask what, but he felt it. In the way her voice didn't shake anymore. In the way her steps didn't retreat. In the way the copper feather on his hat didn't feel like mourning but like memory. Shaped into something beautiful, they rebuilt the back fence together, painted the barn red, traded eggs with neighbors down the ridge, and when folks asked if she was his daughter, or his wife, or his servant, Samuel always answered the same way: "She's the reason this land breathes again." One night, under a blood-orange moon, Suni took the last piece of the old chime, the curved bone, and buried it at the base of the mesquite tree. She didn't speak, just pressed her palm into the soil. When she stood, she turned to Samuel and said, "It won't sing anymore." He nodded. "It doesn't need to." And for the first time in a long time, there was no sound in the wind that made her flinch. Only calm, only sky. Only the hawk on the cabin wall, resting beneath the words, "She lives here now." The symbol was complete. Once it had haunted her. Now it guarded her. No longer flight, but rest, not escape, but home. Because some birds don't need to fly anymore. Not when they finally found the place. Where hawks sleep without fear. Some scars never vanish. They linger like the scent of fire on old wood, quiet, constant, waiting for rain. But healing isn't the erasure of pain. It's the planting of something new in the soil where suffering once bloomed. Suni's story isn't just about survival, it's about transformation. About taking a name once given in silence and making it echo with new meaning. About reclaiming a body once treated as property and using it to build, to paint, to love. The world may never apologize for what it takes from us. But we are not what was taken. We are what we do with what's left. So let this story remind you, no matter how broken you feel, you are not beyond repair. You are not just what happened to you. Just you are what you choose to become after. And somewhere out there, beneath a sky that once tried to burn you, there is a porch, a chime, and a painted wall waiting for the words, "I live here now."